There was I slept in my alarm in the operating exam once. Like there's no like. Also, I like barely made it there. I like run.
The fastest you've ever ran.
I did a scooter across town.
Swam a little across the river.
Get that sweet.
Notre Dame Econ.
How did you get it?
All right, that's a good way to kick things off by like throwing Bridget under the bus. All right, welcome to the senior thesis info session. This is a reminder to myself to record. We are recording, so that says something about your consent and all of this. Introductions. Current thesis writers. We have 3 of them here for you today. First is Megan Allen.
That's Megan.
Josie Donlin.
Oh, they sat in. Yes.
Hi.
Bridget Meisenbacher. And Professor Chloe Gibbs, who is the honors track coordinator, future Biden administration employee, workshop course instructor, and then me.
He's not supposed to say that, so that's why he said it, because.
It was on the slides. All right.
I didn't remove it.
All right, you want to kick it off with them or?
Yeah, so the next slide. See how that works? All right, so we are going to ask our current thesis writers to tell you a little bit about their experience, just to kind of kick things off and get you thinking about what questions you might be interested in, who you might want to work with in doing a thesis. And then just to preview, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of details about the process.
The major requirements, all that kind of stuff.
Logistics, all that.
Yeah.
So Megan, maybe I can start with you and maybe you guys can go down the line and just give like kind of the 2-sentence summary of what your thesis is. And maybe if you'd like to also include your advisor and how you kind of arrived at that particular advisor.
Yeah, sure. So my thesis, I'm writing a paper on the Colorado Family Planning Initiative, which is basically a program in Colorado that provided free long-acting reversible contraceptives, so like IUDs and implants and things like that. And I'm looking how that program impacted abortions in the state of Colorado. And so I found my advisor. I knew I wanted to do a project on public health and policy and something in between those. And my advisor, Chris Cronin, does a lot of work with like health policy. So I went through, and I'd never actually worked with him before, but I went through and looked at some of the papers he'd written in the past. And it seemed like he was doing things that were interesting to me. And so that we matched up, and then I found this policy that I was interested in and kind of kicked off my thesis from there.
Perfect. Josie.
Okay, so my thesis looks at kind of the impact of COVID-19 on like sovereign bond spreads in Latin America. So basically like, I guess the borrowing costs for Latin American governments. And I'm working with Professor Stangby, who teaches international macro and like I think some grad courses too, but I took his international macro class as a junior. And we talked a lot about sovereign debt, and that's kind of where his research focuses. So I ended up reaching out to him, and so we kind of partnered up that way. And then I told him that I was interested in like kind of sovereign debt issues. And so we kind of came to like a topic together and kind of worked through that. Yeah, as a team.
So I'm doing my thesis on the effect of like heightened immigration enforcement in the last decade on the public benefits usage. So things like food stamps and healthcare and things like that among presumably unauthorized immigrants in the US. So kind of looking at that relationship. I'm doing it with Professor Kirk Doran. We had met previously. I hadn't actually taken a class with him, but we had like worked together in the past, and I knew he did a lot of stuff in immigration. So we just chatted, and then I asked if he would be my advisor. So.
Could you guys talk a little bit about how you arrived at your topic? Like, was it something that you were thinking of at sort of this stage when you were a junior, or news article, or what sort of, how did it bubble up to be your topic?
Yeah, I know I was kind of late to the game, I guess, with choosing a topic. Like I didn't have my topic until probably like, I wasn't even positive I wanted to write these until July. So like if you get like scared that you don't have an advisor like right now, don't be, because like you have plenty of time. And so for me, for choosing my topic, it started off with researching different policies I could look into. So I started looking into policies that like had clear start dates and clear end dates. And from that, I was kind of looking at policies that had topics that were interesting to me, and then that would also be studyable with data that's accessible to me and the amount of time I had. And so I worked with my professor or my advisor a lot to do that. So basically talking about what type of policies could we study, what type of policies are interesting to me, and then from there I settled on my topic. But it was mostly like finding my interests and then the data, because with a micro project, the data is really important. So finding data that would line up with my interests and with the policy.
Yeah, so I have like a concentration in financial economics, and then I'm an international econ major with Spanish. So I kind of started out with like, I want to do something in financial economics and then like in the region of Latin America more broadly. So I kind of, like I said earlier, I liked learning about like sovereign debt in my international macro class. So kind of decided that studying like bond markets in Latin America would be an interesting topic. And so I kind of just like looked around at existing research in that field, and I had seen a lot of studies that had looked at like the impact of some variable on sovereign spread. So stuff like things like inequality, or like kind of other, looking at like how does inequality impact borrowing costs, or how does like other variables that may be like unrelated, looking into like how that affects sovereign spread. So I feel like I just started like kind of weeding through like, okay, what's already been done, and kind of talked to my advisor about wanting to create a study that kind of mirrored that structure of like, what's the impact of X on borrowing costs. And so we kind of talked through together like a couple possibilities, and ended up settling on COVID-19 because it was something that hadn't really been done before, and it was something that was really timely and something that I had an interest in.
Yeah, I guess like throughout all my econ coursework, I'd always really been interested in topics relating to immigration. So I'd never technically taken, I think we have like a course in the economics of immigration, but I just like, it was a recurring theme that I knew I was personally interested in. And then as like, in terms of like the very specific topic, I think I did something similar to Megan with my advisor, that I told him, I was like, I want to work on immigration. I think I want to focus on it domestically. And then he had me like pour through all like the most recent and relevant like literature to maybe be a little bit more specific about it. And then we had to like narrow down from there what's feasible, because obviously all of it's kind of centered around what you can get data for and things like that. So obviously like I had landed on something that I was A, interested in, and B, there was data for. So it was kind of finding the cross section of that.
Excuse me. Before we move on, can you guys talk a little bit about your next steps, like what you're planning after graduation? If you have plans, and maybe if the thesis played a role, or the process of doing the thesis played a role in where you're headed?
Yeah, so unfortunately the thesis did not play a role in where I'm headed. I'm going to be working for 8451, which is a company that does data science work for Kroger, and I'm going to be a data scientist with them. I really enjoyed my thesis and the research I've done, and that's made me think more about like, do I want to go to grad school eventually? But right now I'm planning on doing a full-time job starting over the summer.
I'm going into economic consulting with Cornerstone Research in Chicago. So I do think this has like prepared me a lot for my job. I didn't really like plan it that way, but I feel like working with data and like thinking critically about data is something that I'll use a lot in my job. Yeah, so I'm gonna be a research associate at the Federal Reserve San Francisco. And so it was definitely like really relevant as I was like deciding what I wanted to do, but also during the interview process, even if, no matter what stage it was at, like the point that I was interviewing, they asked about it a lot. And obviously it just helped me personally gauge like if research is what I want to go into. So definitely a relevant experience for me.
Great. Any other things you wanna?
Pretty well done.
No, definitely not.
It's due in a few weeks.
Oh,
No.
yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about this. So the people who presented to us last year, they were all applying to grad school right after undergrad. So all of them had finished their theses in like December, because you have to do that in order to apply for grad schools. And all of us were talking about how like we're not behind, but we feel behind, because all of them were like talking about their final results and how they're already like in grad schools, and all of us are still working hard. So.
But it is due the first week of April, which
Yes.
I will say.
Yes, it
sneaks
is
up on you.
definitely coming up fast.
Ask us again in a few weeks.
Yeah.
And I will hopefully say yes.
All right, so we're just gonna go through kind of some of the details about how the thesis works and that kind of thing, but we will return to our illustrious panel and allow you guys to ask questions either on the logistics or on the sort of more content oriented side.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we have 4, perhaps more reasons why you should write a thesis. 1, spend enough time and thought about a problem to become an expert on your topic. Do you all feel like you're, Megan, do you feel like you're an expert on contraceptive law in Colorado?
Much more than I was when I.
You know, like part of the education you get here is like, and if you sort of think about it, especially in the core classes, like you learn very, very broadly. Even if it's like an elective or it's economics of education, economics of immigration or something like that, you don't really do a deep dive on something, you know, a particular policy, a particular market, things like that. There's something that can be very rewarding about becoming an expert in something, because otherwise, you know, I felt very much that I left undergrad feeling like I didn't know much about anything specifically. It's a nice thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, I think it's like a good opportunity to apply the various skills that you've learned in those classes. You might not sort of know yet how to apply them, but like bring together the theory, the econometric skills that you've gained and really dive into a particular topic. Now, this may be a pro or a con, but you know, it's in the slides as a potential reason you might want to do this.
Regular interaction with a faculty member over a course of a year. Actually, do you all have regular interaction?
Yeah.
Bridget, even with Kurt?
Oh.
That is impressive. So either
This is
way.
being recorded. Anyway,
I didn't say anything.
semi-regular, the regularity varies depending on who you're working with.
But that's nice. I mean, like that's something that's different than the classwork that you do right now, right? Where like you really are like going in one-on-one and like and actually being able to like ask questions and have them ask you questions and sort of think about the way that they're modeling the problems is like a super useful thing.
Learn how to conduct independent research to examine a question in depth or test a hypothesis. So, I mean, this is really the transition from being a student in the classroom and learning these skills to being the actual person who's conducting the research. So, you know, actually creating new knowledge and that I think Bridget mentioned, like sort of sussing out whether or not research is a thing that you might want to do as a career. This is really your opportunity to take your own question and independently work on it, and use your skills, develop new skills to study that question.
But you,
Go ahead.
I was saying, even if you don't want to do research, I mean, like
Yeah.
just practicing this skill of like, I'm going to pose this question. I'm going to do all the necessary steps to figure out kind of the background of this question. What do we know? What do we not know? Face the millions of data hurdles that ultimately you're going to face with any particular project, surmount them, and then ultimately figure out what you can do. Like that's pretty cool.
And moving from idea to conception to actualization, I think is a important process.
We're gonna hype that up with the self-help portion later, where you're a better person. through
I
this.
changed the title to self-help because I thought that was a little strong. All right. And also lots of experience with writing, right? Which you may or may not have gotten to date in your economics education. And it turns out that once you leave here, writing is really important in lots of careers that you may head into. Writing even just like policy briefs or memos or those kinds of things. And so this will be, you know, an intensive writing experience. And I think it's good that that you guys get that, especially if you have not to date.
So if you're an international econ major and you do the senior research project, it's like a 1 semester thing you have to do. I feel like I lead one of these semesters, and like the main thing that I try and drill to students is like, you're writing something with a reader in mind. And that's something that like, I think oftentimes people forget when it's like technical writing, but like at the end of the day, like you are going to have to write with readers in mind. And so like being able to write technically and with that sort of intention, I think it's not a natural skill, but it's like something that is like comes with practice.
For sure. So a lot of ways that this kind of brings together what you've done and complements the skills you already have. Get to see what research is like. I mean, I don't know how challenging the experience has been for those who are currently writing, but you know, you do have to, as I said, take something from idea to actual research question to fruition. And so, you know, there is I think a rewarding process in putting in that effort, and you get to kind of see your own capacity to do that. and see, sort of test your non-cognitive skills, as economists like to call these, your persistence, your determination.
Yeah, this is the start of the self-help portion, where it's like, you will test your diligence and persistence and determination and all these things. And like this is, I mean, like some of this stuff seems like flowery and over the top maybe, and it's gonna get worse. But it's kind of true. Like it's a beautiful thing to like get through, done with the process and have something tangible at the end of it. So
I almost brought my thesis that I wrote as a student at Notre Dame when I was a senior, but I was like too embarrassed that someone might open it up and actually look at it.
You should have done it.
But this was like back in the day when we had to go to Kinko's, it was called at the time, and it was located in the basement of the Fortune, and you had to go and like hand them the physical copy, and I'm acting like this was like, Little House on the Prairie, but they had to like bind it and give you the physical copies back, and then you had to submit them at various places. Anyway, it's a pretty neat feeling to actually sort of like create that thing yourself and have that. And I think it also is useful when you apply to jobs, when you apply to grad school, to have this sort of tangible product that you have created. And I think it also helps you to sort of see all the skills that you have learned and how they can be employed in the actual conduct of research.
That's a super cool thing. Like I was looking around, who has taken a Moreau section with me? Lauren, I think, is the only one to have had the privilege in here. But like, we talk a lot about formation, and like this is just like another sort of like thing you can do to be engaged in formation while you're here. And like that maybe sounds a little bit over the top, but it's true. Like being able to like take the skills you've learned and do something independently and showcase those things, like that's a cool thing. Okay. You
So
can also get money.
There's a couple other things. Yeah, you can win some awards.
Yeah, we've had people in the past win the Library Research Award. This Sheehan Award is given to the best honors thesis each year. There's some cash prize associated with these.
Is there?
Yeah, it's not negligible for the Sheehan Award.
So there you go. That's one.
Research awards like $1,000.
Yeah.
You might produce a paper with these eminent scholars here that you can see. Some of these have been published, some are still working papers or in the process, but sometimes the collaborations, I think everyone here described an idea that really they came up with and went to an advisor with, but in some cases, it's a little more sort of both ways and collaborative, and might result in a co-authored paper.
Melanie, it was the science paper. Melanie's at Berkeley?
No, Stanford, and she's on the job market this year, so she'll be a faculty member next year.
Cool.
Out of Stanford Econ.
Caroline? I saw you gave yourself a shout out last bullet.
Yeah, we have this new paper. She's working at the Fed, the Board of Governors, and she's applying to graduate school now.
And potentially.
I mean, this is fake.
Sort of like in terms of like marginal impacts, we're like going real low on the.
Yes.
You might get back to Notre Dame. Or this.
So I went to change, participated in an info session. I mean, that is a big honor, a huge honor. But the other is that in the workshop in the fall, which we'll talk a little bit more about, which is a class that those doing the honors thesis take, we bring back some previous thesis writers to talk to the group about both their thesis project, but also their career trajectory. So that's also a possibility. And then I mean, it gets bigger because you could have your thesis stored in a Google Drive.
There's talks in the process of finding these things.
I know just the place. The basement of the Fortune. But anyway, it will live on in infamy with your name on it, which is really cool.
Cool. All right.
What is a thesis, Forrest?
How does it differ from a term paper?
We should not be.
This is our first time doing this. We're still ironing out the kinks. A thesis offers a new answer to an open question.
Yes, it does. So importantly, you're working with an advisor, so you're not just sort of tossed out to figure this out on your own. But you are expected to be obviously much more independent in terms of leading the research, coming up with the question, and there's a greater emphasis on developing something original relative to what the literature has already done. So as these folks have heard me say many times in the thesis workshop, what you're really looking for is the intersection of three things. You're looking for a question that interests you and that you're passionate about because you're going to be working on it for a year. And you're looking for something that is feasible, and feasible varies based on the area that you're in. If you're doing an applied micro project, it means that you have the data to answer the question. If you're doing a theory project, it means that you can execute it in the time that you have to do so. So interests you, feasible, and is an advancement in the knowledge beyond what we already know, right? And so, and that looks different in different areas, but that there is something original about the contribution that you are going to make. And that's not, I mean, that's like what I'm engaged in every day too. That's not an easy thing to do, to find that intersection of those three things.
But to me, like if you're doing a year-long thesis, like the first is absolutely critical. Like you just gotta want to do a deep dive on something for a year. It's a long time. And if you don't, if you ultimately like you just think your project sounds cool and you're not super interested in, sovereign bond spreads, right? I'm not saying you are not, Josie, but like if you're not interested in this stuff, then like ultimately like it's going to be a slog. So that's why I tell the international econ students, like make sure make sure it's something you want to become an expert in.
Because it's a journey. And you are going to be reading a bunch of literature about this particular topic or that surrounds this particular topic. So it has to be something you really want to learn about, and a question that you really want to be able to answer. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to bring together all the tools we have as economists, right? Which is the theory, the conceptual underpinnings to help you understand a problem, and then the empirical or modeling tools to help you answer that question, right? So that's really the crux of what you're doing in a thesis project.
Three different types. The first is just write like a pure theory paper. So think back to intermediate micro, maybe intermediate macro. Like typically, if you're gonna write a theory paper, typically they're micro theory papers.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Like ultimately, like think like if you're taking game theory, if you're taking it, you remember you have to take an intermediate micro. If you remember intermediate micro, like ultimately we use these models to try and understand economic phenomena. So like we beat people over the head with income and substitution effects, compensated equivalent variations, because ultimately like we want to think about, if there's a change in policy, like if there's a change in the tax rate, right? Or there's a change in some sort of subsidy that goes to people, like we want to think about what their impact is, that is on their like labor market decision. And ultimately like it's theory that tells us like that effect is like ambiguous.
Right. So an example, in this year's cohort, Elizabeth Chen is writing a paper on optimal vaccine deployment strategy. So like who you vaccinate first, in a situation like a contagious infectious disease. So that's an example of using our modeling tools to think about a real world problem.
A more common thesis is an empirical paper. Okay, so what are we doing? Like we're trying to test theories. Ultimately, like theorists write this stuff down. We want to take data and actually test these particular theories in particular contexts. And so what are you doing? Like you're using statistical methods now to uncover and explain these things.
That's right.
Or a third, a combination. If you want, you can write out a model or I guess you can motivate this with some sort of empirical fact. Write down a model, think about the incentives involved with, whatever economic agents you're thinking about in this model, and then test it, right? So test to see like what effects are ultimately driving things. So use a theoretical model to derive hypotheses, right? Use theory to tell you here's some hypotheses, and then ultimately test it using data. You want to say something about like the distribution of theses between 1, 2, and 3?
Definitely heavily number 2,
Yeah.
both on the macro and micro side.
Yeah.
I would say there's like just in each year, probably 5% theory and a couple combo papers.
Yeah, I mean, but if you think about like, so Megan, I'm gonna speak for you. If you think about Megan's paper where she's thinking about like the impact of providing IUDs on abortions, like that's an empirical paper, but like there is economic theory behind that. She's not writing out a model of, you know, women making these decisions and then sort of like, you know, looking at some first order conditions and thinking about incentives of the agents in the model. But like ultimately, like there's some economic theory that tells us like there is some sort of substitutability or complementarity like between these things, and like we can test that. You know, that's an empirical paper. She's testing this, you know, using data.
Yeah, I tend to think all empirical papers
Should
are
be
in some
grounded.
way combo papers.
Now nitty gritty logistics. This is where I guess I'll take over. If you do a senior thesis, not a senior honors thesis, you'll sign up for Econ 47970 in the fall and in the spring. If you do the honors thesis, you'll be in Econ 43962 for the fall. That is the workshop. You say that's the cohort of all the honors students that are working on this workshop together. Chloe has done this in the past. She's not doing it in the fall because she's going to be working for the Council of Economic Advisors. And in the spring, you'll do 479.
I think that's right.
One was a 6. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll tell you what to sign up for when the time comes. But basically, so these are 3 credit hour classes that you sign up for. They're 40,000 level. They meet the econ write intensive attribute. So both pass here, whether you do a senior thesis or a senior econ thesis, count as 2 40,000 level econ write intensive classes. It also satisfies like the core writ attribute that you need, the university requirement. If you're an international econ student, the senior research project is the 1 semester long. Senior research project is a requirement. This substitutes for that. And it counts as like one of your 2 international econ electives. What else did I want to say? If you're a general economics major, how many electives do you have to take total? 4. Yeah, so this would count as 2. If you do a senior thesis, this would count as 2 of those 4 elective requirements.
On the website, it says you still need to take a 40,000 level writing requirement before then. So like, what's the benefit?
That's suggested.
Oh, it's not required.
Yeah, so like we're moving to a world where we want honors students, not for the general thesis, but ultimately we want honors students to like take a 43,000 level class in their junior year. It's not required right now, but it is required as of you all the first class that this is a requirement. If you do an honors thesis, you got to take 5 electives instead of 4. So that brings us to honors versus non-honors track.
One quick point on the previous slide, those first 2 bullets, so for the senior thesis or for the honors thesis in the spring, you register for an instructor specific section of 47970. So you just need to make sure that the advisor with whom you're working has a section opened up, and we can get that set up if it doesn't already exist.
You should email Shannon Carter. Like we'll work out all this, the logistics behind that. But it is not obvious like how you should register for these things, but hopefully we give you good information. Like I said earlier, senior thesis opportunity is open to all econ and international econ majors. If you do honors, you have to satisfy GPA requirements. You have to have an A- average in the required classes. So it's either the core courses or you have to have an A-, including principles in stats, and then like a 3.4 overall, something like that. And then if you are unsure about whether you meet this requirement or not, just send me an email and I'll tell you. There's now an additional elective if you do the honors track. So you have to take 5 electives total. 2 of them are the thesis course. And so it's not as of your junior year, but one of those 5 totals has to be at the 43,000 level. So you gotta take a 43,000 level elective. So this would be like international macro, or what 43,000 level classes?
It's okay, advanced labor econ.
Advanced labor, forecasting, you gotta take one. And then 2 thesis courses. Does that make sense? Smooth, okay. And you have to apply on the website by April 25th. It should be relatively easy to find. It's not all stuff, like just send me an email. If you're doing a Glenn thesis, if you're doing a sustainability thesis, if you are doing there's an iTrends program that I just found out about. you're doing a thesis for something else, with Glenn, it's like super easy how it, like, they complement each other. But if you're doing something that's not Glenn, we just kind of have to have a conversation about how these potentially would complement each other. But it's definitely possible.
It typically works that your thesis satisfies the requirements in both places, and we just have to work out whether you have to take workshop classes in both places or that sort of thing.
Next step. Well, you gotta find a topic, you gotta find a thesis advisor. That can like seem, that's actually, I would say that that's the biggest hurdle. There's different ways that you can do this. Josie, you were saying you took advanced macro or international macro with Zach Stainby, like that's one way. So like you talk about sovereign bond spreads there, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's one way. That's not a necessary condition in order for finding a topic and an advisor, but taking a 40,000 level class, like, whatever you're doing right now, if you find something interesting, like, reach out to your instructor and say, hey, like, are you taking on thesis students next year? I'm interested in X or Y or Z or whatever. Okay. Megan, how did you figure out what Cronin's papers were?
There's actually a repository of like thesis topics, basically. So basically what all the professors study and the working papers that they have. So I looked at that and I found a professor that had like topics similar to mine, and then I just shot him an email. We met and then talked about it. I know this was like a step that was kind of daunting to me because I didn't take any classes that I was like interested in writing a thesis about, but the repository of subjects really helped.
Good segue.
So we have a repository with, as Megan described, essentially everyone's research areas. If they've submitted specific things they're interested in or potential research questions they might be interested in exploring, those are there too.
That describes what, like 98% of faculty. I would really like to throw a couple people under the bus.
The level of specificity varies in terms of who responded to my many emails, but I will share the topics database with you. Just shoot me an email if you would like to see it, and we'll send it out.
And if you want to do the honors track as opposed to the regular thesis, you have to apply for that. The deadline's April 25th. We'll call that a hard deadline right now, even though it's not. You do have to register for the honors thesis in the fall. If you are on the honors track, send you emails, we'll figure it out. I mean, like logistically, we will make sure you have the information necessary to do that. I want to give a shout out for the workshop.
Yeah, so the workshop, the idea behind the workshop is a couple things. One is that it is an opportunity for you to discuss and get feedback from your cohort mates who are also writing thesis projects. It is also an opportunity to do just sort of generally some foundational research skills that we think, a person writing a thesis in economics should be launched into the world with. And so some of those are library research skills or internet research skills. Some of those are working with data. And so we try to just cover kind of a broad base there as well. And then the other big piece of it is to just hold you accountable to particular deadlines so that you're making progress throughout the fall semester. So you're meeting in the workshop, you are also having conversations and meeting with your advisor, though I think probably most of your experience was less frequently in the fall than in the spring semester when things get more intense. And so the idea behind the workshop is to just keep things moving along. And your advisor actually co-grades your big deliverable in the fall semester. They essentially provide the content grade for your draft. So it's really just to kind of keep things moving and hold you accountable to making progress.
In terms of expectations, I don't know if this is right or not, but it seems like people put like sort of the finding a topic in a thesis advisor as like the most difficult thing. It's actually like, it's much less difficult than you actually think. Holding yourself accountable and delivering regular deliverables, you way overestimate your ability to do that. It's just human nature, but like.
And I think on the topic and thesis advisor piece, if you are feeling, if that's feeling daunting to you, reach out to us.
Yeah.
We're happy to help make those matches. Look at the topics database if that's helpful. But also if if you have some topic that you're interested in and you're not quite sure of the fit, you could float it with us and we can help you think through who the right person might be.
Yeah. And then if there are freshmen or sophomores in here, like one thing to think about is working as a research assistant for a faculty member to get some exposure to doing research. we have a form that goes out every semester now. This is like, do you want to be employed with the econ department? One thing you can check off there is like, well, I want to be a research assistant, I'm interested in working with these particular instructors. It's not guaranteed to match, but it like certainly makes it much more likely. You can also just sort of cold email faculty and say, hey, are you looking for somebody to help out? Typically it's done after you've taken econometrics. Because like that's a lot of like what RAs do is like working with data. Oh yeah, and so I will solicit labor supply later this semester. I'll send out an email about whether you want to be an RA or not.
Had any of you guys been RAs before?
Yeah.
Oh, you all had, okay.
I know me and Bridget both work for.
Yeah, we worked, actually, we
I
all
did too.
worked.
Oh, we all
for so Leo pipeline,
You all worked.
but also,
That's what you say, sorry.
I worked as a regular one too, but also you can definitely do with that, so don't worry.
Yeah. For sure. I was actually surprised you all had, because it's definitely varied in terms of experience, but it is one good way to get exposure to a faculty member's research and get a sense of whether that is an area in which you might want to do a project.
It's in no way like a necessary condition though.
So there are definitely some funding opportunities available if you are working with data that requires, that you purchase access, or if you have to travel to, the best example I can think of is like there's archives in DC that sometimes people who are doing economic history projects might travel to. So if you need those sorts of things, there are resources available so we can get the ball rolling early. The biggest of which is ISLA, which has lots of undergraduate research funding available. But if there are any specific things that you will need or that you want to do to pursue your project, we can often get the funding for that.
Yeah, and past students have gone to like Italy. He like ran a survey of like people, of like immigrants in Italy. Mark, I'm forgetting his last name, went to Jerusalem. Like there's opportunities for this. So just like reach out if you're sort of thinking like, oh, I have something that could like really complement my thesis, some travel or whatever, or just combine data. If you're international econ in particular, like there's a big pot of money out there for travel for this. It's like just ripe for tapping. Oh yeah, sorry. Yep.
There it is.
Isla?
Yeah.
Isla.
It has a little accent on it.
And then the senior thesis guidelines are on the website. Reviewing that, like you're gonna get this eventually, but yeah, that's one thing you can do.
All right. So now what questions do you have for us or for Daniel?
A little bit of a boring kind of logistics question, but if you're still kind of in the core classes, you won't have had your grades back by the time you're applying for the honors program?
Yeah,
What
so
would the-
there is on the honors application, I'm almost sure that I've made this change where you can put like currently taking or econometrics or whatever. So the to technically meet the guidelines for the honors track, you have to have had some grade, right, in intermediate micro, intermediate macro, and econometrics. If you are currently taking one of those and you're a junior, like you still qualify for the honors track, but like ultimately you won't know whether you meet the GPA threshold. You have some sort of good idea yourself, but like whether you meet the GPA threshold, you're welcome to apply ahead of time and then we'll kind of figure it out later. Like worst case scenario, you apply, you don't meet the GPA threshold, and if you're really passionate about writing a thesis, like you still write the thesis anyway, it's just a senior thesis instead of a senior honors thesis. The honors is like a technical thing that you get a designation on your, I was gonna say GPS, but like also like your degree. It says like honors track.
Can't wait for that.
But either track, you qualify for all the awards, you still submit the first week of April to the department, it goes into the repository, all that.
Kind of follow this, so like do the honors track, like literally the only difference between the two tracks.
Workshop versus not workshop, elective requirement.
Designation.
I get to put this on your GPS if you are now econ honors track. You know what GPS is?
No.
Dang, you're showing your age.
How would you like check our?
It's not letting you.
It's awful, you don't need to know it.
I can also calculate your.
That's what I see, like,
Yeah.
I cannot
We
believe.
used to have to walk to the registrar's office, and they had to pull out a scroll.
GPS is more complicated.
According to my GPS, I'm like not graduating, so.
Maybe the 40,011 for internationally come.
Good question, no.
Okay.
And actually, that right now, that is a requirement that only impacts general economics majors. It does not impact international majors. That's a good question.
Do a lot of people, do many people collect primary data for the thesis, or do most people do secondary? And if you want to do primary data, does that change the timeline? Like if I'm gonna be here, I'm living here this summer and I want to do something in South Bend area.
It's a great question. People do both. I would say it's predominantly secondary data analysis, but your instincts are exactly right. If you are inclined to do primary data analysis, it's a good idea to get started as soon as you can. The key thing there would be that you are paired up with an advisor who can guide you through those early steps that would happen sort of before the official thesis process begins. Because you'll have to do things like institutional review board, which will review the data for the process for human subjects protections and all that. That has to be submitted by a faculty member. So there are some extra steps to that, but yes, I think in the instances where I know people have done primary data collection, they have started early.
Yeah.
But not always. I mean, some people have run a survey in the fall semester and they get the data back in time to be able to analyze it and that kind of thing. So
But generally, it is.
you want to allow yourself as much time as possible, especially given sort of current situation where you never know if like access to people might change given COVID and all that. So it's good to start early.
Do you have to be a full-time student your senior year to do a thesis?
No, but you have to take the course. You have to take the 3 credit hour class. Yeah.
When do you generally settle on an advisor and topic? Is that before we leave as juniors? I know it's gonna be
We
very
like that.
Okay.
Right, like that makes the situation kind of easiest for everybody. If the student, the faculty member, the powers that be, and even in the department where they're trying to coordinate all these things.
But it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it doesn't happen always.
So sometimes in the fall semester, when you do the workshop course, one of the things that I check in on in the context of that course is sort of that everybody has an advisor, that things are going smoothly with that. Some people at that, those first couple weeks still are finding somebody, and we make sure that we get that worked out pretty quickly.
Yeah, how many honors students are there honors?
We had 20 in the
20, I feel like I was tracking down 3 to 5 of them at the end of the spring, hey, you got an advisor. So it wasn't it's not 0, but it's not the majority either. They're still looking for an advisor at the end of the semester. Well, we've got to take up the entire time.
What's your favorite, or
I'm just
what's your
kidding, we don't actually have to.
but I would like to ask the panel. The panel probably has good advice for sort of what's your best tip for them at this phase? What do you wish you had known at the stage of the spring of your junior year when you were sort of charting this all out? Maybe you knew everything because we had provided
We give
such
such
good
great
information.
guidance. Christina does.
I think my advice would be that, obviously you need to figure out who your advisor is and maybe more vaguely what your topic is, but don't put it all on yourself that you need to have this very, very, very clear roadmap with all these super defined. I'm gonna run this exact regression as you're figuring this stuff out. Cause I remember at the beginning, I was personally not satisfied with what I had landed. I was happy with my topic, but I'm I don't know where I'm gonna go with this. And obviously your advisor will point you to whether this data is available or if this is a feasible idea, if this is causal or anything like that. But I would just say don't put too much pressure on yourself to be I know exactly where I'm gonna be in whatever April of 2023. It's okay. You're gonna have to roll with the punches throughout the whole process. So you might as well just set that expectation for yourself pretty early.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar, actually. I remember feeling very overwhelmed the entire process, that the the end of last year, especially because like it took me a while to settle on an advisor and a topic, but ended up being perfectly fine. Like I found an advisor kind of late to the game, but we like worked together, found a topic, and it wasn't a big deal. So even if you don't have like a specific advisor in mind right now, like it's not super high pressure, like just find someone who has interesting topics, and then they'll help you guide you through the rest of the process. So don't like feel like you have to have everything figured out right now.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of similar, but I think like it kind of sounds overwhelming to like take on this whole project by yourself and like from all the stages from like idea to actually like executing. But I think we have like a lot of resources, obviously like Professor Gibbs and Professor Spence can help you out. I went and talked to like Professor D at like during advising office hours when I was a junior, just to like bounce ideas off of her. And then like your advisor will be super helpful. So you don't have to feel like you have to like do all this by yourself. Like you're gonna have a lot of help and guidance along the way.
Also, don't be afraid to reach out to professors and ask them like to meet to talk about a topic. And even if they're not willing to work with you, I'm sure they'll be able to point you to someone who would be willing to work with you or could be willing to work with you. So like, don't feel afraid to just send an email and see if you can set up a meeting or something like that.
You don't have to land on the first person you talk to. I did not land on the first person I talked to, so it's okay.
Tell me, you feel free to like say this is bad advice, but I'll typically tell students that don't really kind of know what they want to do. Like if you just say like, I'm interested in a development topic, and you know, maybe it's a little more fine-tuned than that. So like you can sort by development on our website. Like here are the faculty that do development projects. Go look at their website, see what they're doing, and say like, you know, reach out via email, hey, like I think what you're doing on this, flattery is a good way to go, right? I think like what you're doing on X is really interesting. I'm not sure, I'd like to do something related to this, to a thesis, but I'm not really sure. You don't have to, if you don't want to like invest a ton of time into just sending an email to one person, right? In some sense, like it's better to cast a wide net. There's a trade-off, right? Like, you know, if you cast a wide net, but have sort of shallow-ish like interest, shallow in the sense of like not super specific, then it's not clear that you're going to be less likely to meet up with somebody or match up with somebody than if you just like put all of your eggs into the Chris Cronin basket and say, hey, I really want to do this Colorado policy, et cetera. So there's some sort of trade-off there.
Yep. And I think you're probably already somewhere on that spectrum. Like some people have a pretty specific question that they want to investigate and they just need to find the person who will be the right one to guide them with that. Some people just sort of broadly know they want to do development in Sub-Saharan Africa or something, and then they need to narrow that to a feasible question and pair up with someone who can help them do that. So feel free to email for the topics database if that would be helpful to you. Feel free to reach out to us if we can help you find the right match or sort of identify people you might want to talk to. I will say that Forrest has mentioned perhaps too many times that I will be on leave next year. That's a thing that happens with faculty, that there's just kind of some people are on sabbatical, some people won't be available. And so
big deal.
So some people, so sometimes the match may take a couple steps just because you have someone in mind, but that person's not going to be available. And so we can help navigate those situations as well. What other questions?
Michelle, give us a specific example. Michelle's a junior. What do you want to do your thesis on?
Oh my God. Please talk about it.
I started I'm applying regulatory focus theory from organizational behavior onto diversity promotion.
Yeah. So some people already know, but you're not behind if you don't. That's fine. Don't hesitate to email us. Like you're gonna forget a lot of this stuff, and so just email us. Say I'm still interested in the process. I'm kind of stuck. I'm in a rut. Like I don't know whatever. Like we're here to help you through this process. Okay. Good.
Topics database, guidelines are on the website. Application for honors is on the website.
Look forward to all of you embarking in this journey. Something about promoting human growth. This is related to all 5 pillars of Holy Cross education. I think we're done.
Thank you to our panel who are in the midst of this process. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer questions.
If you want a student's view, not that the journey metaphor isn't great. I probably won't use that though. So
if you want to ask them without our commentary in the background, that's fine too. And as Forrest said, Professor Spence said, reach out to us if you need to, and Thank you.